Hey everyone, welcome back to A Perspective. This is MJ speaking. Thank you so much for joining us again, and I am super excited to have you guys back for another episode on the podcast. So today I am coming at you from my mother's walk-in closet in her household, and that is because I couldn't find any other place in the house that was not super loud and you could just hear people banging pots and pans in the background. So I am currently coming at you from my mother's walk-in closet, no longer in Victoria, BC. I moved back to my hometown, which is a little suburb near Vancouver called Port Moody, and I will be living here with my mother and my sister for the next 3 to 4 months because I will be studying for my MCAT exam that I will be taking in August. So I am taking these next couple days off since the end of my semester to just breathe, get in the headspace, enjoy some time off, as much as you can with COVID-19, of course, but just really getting into the mindset of what the next couple months are going to be leading up to the exam. But nonetheless, I am super excited to take the first step towards my journey towards becoming a doctor. So that being said, given that I'm no longer in Victoria, BC, today I am calling in from the unceded traditional territory of the Coquitlam, Squamish, Musqueam, Stowlow, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations tribes, and I want to give a great acknowledgement and express my greatest gratitude to these Indigenous tribes for allowing me to be an uninvited visitor on this unceded territory. This has been my home since I was about 6 years old when we moved here from Mexico City, and I feel so blessed to be able to have grown up here in the beauty that is this territory and this land, for everything it is, and I feel so grateful to be able to come back here continuously and visit my family and continue to relish in everything that it is. So my greatest gratitude goes out to these communities. Now, I want to start this episode by saying that I am about to get very vulnerable on some subjects that are near and dear to my heart, but also part of subject matter that is very pertinent and present in our society today. I sat down right in this closet last night and tried to record another episode that I had planned out, but I just absolutely could not focus because my head was just buzzing with all these thoughts that I've had over the last few days, and my head just kept telling me, this isn't really what you want to be saying right now, and I don't think that this is what you feel needs to be said right now. So I decided to scratch that, and the truth is I've been wanting to make this episode for a couple days after some events that stirred some thought in me, but I've been procrastinating it and honestly just shying away from it because I think you never know how scary it can be to express your opinion about something until you are put in a position to share it with people other than the people closest to you that you know wouldn't lash at you necessarily for having perhaps a different opinion than them. And I know that right now, on the topics I'm going to touch on, there's a lot of opinions that are contradictory to each other and very different from each other, and I am really scared as I am sitting here recording this. I'm going to be very upfront about that. However, I think I just have to keep reminding myself that these are just opinions and this is just my perspective. I want to preface this entire episode by saying that this segment that I am about to record here and to give to you is not me trying to shove my opinion down your throat. It is simply me speaking out loud and trying to get ideas out there in order to make sense of them and hopefully find people who might relate or might have some more education about it than I do, or might have some stronger views on it, more effective views on it than I do, as somebody with only, the amount of knowledge and research that can come from social media and external peer-reviewed articles that I've been reading during this time. So if anything in this episode stands out to you and you are against it or for it or have an opinion about it, I want to encourage you to totally reach out to me via email, via Instagram DM, via voice memo right here on the podcast. I am so open to hearing your opinion because I acknowledge that mine and my approach to what I'm about to talk about may not necessarily be the greatest or the solution that we all need to be hearing right now, but again, emphasis on it is just my opinion, and I'm hoping to share it with you guys to stir some discussion. So the reason why I was inspired to make this brain dump of a podcast episode is due to two recent events that occurred in my life and in the media, I guess, that really got me thinking about a lot of things, and especially how, as human beings, we respond to situations that anger us and touch us in a way that hurts and makes us feel unseen. Now, there's a common ground between these two events that I will touch on and I will explain. However, I will explain the two events separately and get into a little bit about both of them, and then just kind of state why they stirred this particular thought in me. So, without further ado, the first event that got me thinking this week was, or I guess last week, was, as many of you that are listening know and may have heard, last week, Officer Derek Chauvin was convicted for the murder of George Floyd that occurred last year. And I speak for myself, but I think that I can speak for others when watching the trial live and hearing the judge give the final conviction and deem Derek as guilty was just I felt like this mass sigh of relief from so many people, especially George Floyd's family, and especially the Black community, but also from all of the allies that have been watching, and for many of us who watched George be murdered on live television several times as it was broadcasted. Now, after the conviction, some of you may have gone to the news and seen that the Speaker of the White House, Nancy Pelosi, gave a speech in an attempt to honor George Floyd and in an attempt to show her support for the Black community during this trial, which yielded the result that we were all hoping for. However, Nancy's speech was, I would say, more harmful than supportive, unfortunately. Now, what Nancy Pelosi said in this speech that she gave, and I quote here from the speech itself, she said, "Thank you, George Floyd, for sacrificing your life for justice. For being there to call out to your mom. How heartbreaking was that? And because of you, your name will always be synonymous with justice." Now, as someone who is a very avid supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also as someone who, I am Latina, Hispanic, so being somebody from a visible minority, Nancy's words were very frustrating because George Floyd did not sacrifice himself. He didn't hand himself over to police for the sake of showing the world the ongoing police brutality that has existed for hundreds of years. It wasn't a sacrifice for justice. George Floyd was murdered in vain at the hands of a police officer who arguably killed George Floyd out of hate and racism and unconscious bias. And to hear that, I can only imagine the frustration that others must have felt, especially after feeling the encouragement and the relief that was the verdict of Derek Chauvin's trial. And I have to say that honestly, my first reaction to Nancy Pelosi's words were just the deepest anger and the deepest frustration and the deepest aggression, which is so hard to say out loud because I think that I honestly never experienced anger or hatred towards any human being in the way that I did watching Derek Chauvin did to George multiple times on live television. And it's scary to say things out loud, and it's scary to imagine that we are capable of these feelings. However, they are valid, and I do not want to come across as someone who is devaluing the anger that was felt and is still being felt after Nancy Pelosi's words. However, like I said, my first instinct and my first reaction was to get on social media, get on Instagram, get on Twitter, and just lash at her. Nancy Pelosi, how could you? You are a Speaker of the White House. You are an acknowledged representative of the White House. How could you be so unaware of the reality of the situation? How could you say that George Floyd was doing this for justice? Like, how could, after all this time, you still think that this was an act of sacrifice on behalf of a Black man to show the world how marginalized and oppressed Black communities are? Right? Like, that was my first reaction, and I'm sure that that is widespread across the feelings of many people. However, I had to take a moment to decide whether I wanted to be just another one of the thousands of comments that took to social media to lash at Nancy the way that they did. There were numerous comments that I will absolutely acknowledge were calm and educated and insightful into the harm that her speech did. However, there were also many comments that were aggressive and rude. I guess there were not some not so nice language in there, and just written out of anger, which again I don't devalue, because that anger deserves to be felt after that. But then I had to ask myself if I would ever lash at one of my friends or my family members that way, if they said something that was contradictory to something I believed in, or something contradictory to what a situation really was, which in this case was a man being murdered in cold blood, not sacrificed for social justice. And I had to think to myself, what if somebody who was trying to become educated was scrolling through these comments and then felt afraid to engage further in conversation or further express their public opinion out of fear of getting lashed back at the way that these comments did to Nancy? I have to say that I don't believe that abiding by a culture where criticism and lashback is our response to miseducation and ignorance is the solution. And that statement that I just made right there is the reason why I was afraid to make this podcast, because I think that people are angry right now, and people are hurt, people are hurting, and people want justice. And sometimes, because many marginalized communities, including, the community that I'm from, which, like I said, is Latina Hispanic, like, I see my family members and I've seen my friends from other cultures as well be marginalized and be oppressed and experience racism in front of me multiple times, and I feel the anger and I feel the frustration of seeing people who are privileged enough to have a voice but do not use it for the greater good. And I know that we need representation and that we need to drive change. And I know that we need to find a way to ensure that everybody is receiving the equality and the equity we need. But as someone who has been criticized for her opinion and been criticized for her mistakes and has seen others be criticized for their mistakes, criticism is never the answer for multiple reasons. And there's reasons that I'm going to get into right now. When I was about 17, 18 years old, I read the book How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. Now, I want to start this off on kind of a funny note by saying that, like, the amount of times I would go out to the park on a sunny day and have the book open in front of me, just like reading by the beach, reading on the grass, and the dirty looks I would get from people being like, wow, this girl must be so lonely that she felt the need to read a book on how to make friends. That is just, I have like never felt so rock bottom. Like, some of the looks, I was just like, why, what the heck, why did I do this to myself? However, if you haven't read this book, I seriously encourage it, because it has allowed me to watch my language and to watch my behavior towards others in a way that has allowed me to make some way deeper connections than I think I would have if I continued to respond to others out of emotion versus awareness, as I think I used to more often when I was a teenager. So this book describes how a lot of the narratives that we use in day-to-day can actually harm our relationships and create hostility between people. It goes into the hostility and the tensions that were felt between great leaders in the world, and a lot of the narratives that drove people to experience inner feelings that then manifested themselves as the Second World War, robberies, murders, etc. The reason why criticism is so harmful is because it harms people's egos, which most of us know egos are like the inner child within us that is just making a tantrum whenever we are put in even slight discomfort, and it just seeks to justify everything that happens to it in order to protect ourselves and to protect itself. And by harming the ego, we harm the person's pride, and thus we create feelings of resentment within that person towards us when we use a narrative of criticism. Now, the book also explains an example that occurred when Abraham Lincoln was president during the Battle of Gettysburg in July of 1863. I won't go into the story too much. I also don't know it very much. I only know very surface level American history. But in this battle, General Lee, which was of the opposing army to Lincoln's, reached Potomac. I really hope I pronounced that right. And his army was nearly defeated. Lincoln was so close to winning the fight. They were in a perfect position in which Lincoln could just stretch out his arm, grab them, and call it quits. So Lincoln seized this opportunity and sent a telegraph and a message to General Meade, which was the leader of his army at the time, and gives him a very detailed, descriptive strategy as to how to capture General Lee's army so that the war can be over. The catch was that General Meade did the exact opposite of what Lincoln told him to do. What that was, I have no idea, because the book doesn't go into a lot of depth into it. However, all I know is that General Meade did exactly the opposite of what he was ordered to do, and because of that, General Lee's army got away, which was incredibly embarrassing and insulting to Abraham Lincoln, because like they were just out of reach that the war could have been called quits. And obviously Lincoln finds out about this, and he is the angriest he's ever been. He's trying to make reason for this, and I can only imagine that in that moment he wanted to do many things that were very ungodly to to General Meade. But in this book, Dale Carnegie recounts a letter that Lincoln wrote to General Meade, and I have the book in front of me right now, so I'm going to read it to you. It goes, "My dear General, I do not believe you appreciate the magnitude of the misfortune involved in Lee's escape. He was within our easy grasp, and to have closed upon him would, in connection with other late successes, have ended the war. As it is, the war will be prolonged indefinitely. If you could not safely attack Lee last Monday, how can you possibly do so south of the river, when you can take with you very few, no more than 2/3 of the force you then had in hand? It would be unreasonable to expect, and I do not expect that you can now effect much. Your golden opportunity is gone, and I am distressed immeasurably because of it." Now, catch number 2, Dale Carnegie goes on to explain, is that Lincoln actually never sent that letter. He actually forgave General Meade, because he sat there, and given that Abraham Lincoln at this time was not directly fighting in the war, involved in the chaos of the war itself in battle, he took a moment and asked himself, what could have driven General Meade to disregard my command? It's probably because he has seen people die, and he has seen bloodbath that many people will never see in their lives. And he probably knew the cost that my specific command would have done, and thus chose to ignore it for a reason that is beyond me. And Lincoln chose to forgive him. And the book doesn't go on much further to explain what the relationship was afterwards, because Lincoln died shortly after. However, you can only imagine what shame and damage a letter like that probably could have caused to a general who was responsible for the lives of his entire army, and really the safety of civilians, many civilians, because his army was fighting for the safety of these people. So what I'm trying to bring up by this point is that, again, I don't want to justify what Nancy Pelosi said, and I'm not trying to defend her case, but what I'm trying to say is that when we are given the choice to respond or to react to somebody's words or actions, we need to take a second before we react. You know, there's a saying that between the stimulus and the response, there is a moment in which you can choose what the response is. And I think that a lot of times we can get so caught up in being driven by the anger and the frustration that we are feeling, and we let that drive our response because we want to make the person see us, and because we want the person to feel the way that we just did. And reality, when we do that, and when we try to belittle somebody for their actions and try to bring them down to a level to which we are feeling so that we then feel that they see us, in reality, the resentment that they form within themselves against us only blinds them towards us more and causes hostility and a even further decreased willingness on their behalf to comply and try to understand, because for all they know, you are somebody that could then harm them. Criticism isn't the answer. And I want to tie this concept of criticism to the second event that recently happened in my life that got me thinking even more about criticism and how it actually harms a community and a society versus helping to drive change. Now, given that I am sitting in my mother's walk-in closet talking to a laptop with a notebook, I have to say that the people that watch me read this book out in the park back then would probably say something along the lines of, yeah, she definitely needed that book, but definitely didn't listen to it or got nothing out of it. So, kudos to you guys. Here we are. So, anyways, little sidetrack there. The second event that recently happened in my life occurred a couple days ago, and I was talking to two people in my life, and we were talking about race and gender equality and feminism, and one of them proceeded to use the phrase, kill all men, which I had never heard of up until that day, and I feel like I've been living under a rock because apparently this has been circulating for a couple of weeks now, or months for all I know, but they use the phrase kill all men, and my instant response was retaliation, right? I was super stunned. I was like, whoa, what is that? And then these two individuals went on to explain that this is a narrative that is being used by women to perpetuate a feeling of safety within them whenever they see a man, so that they can assume the worst in him, and it is meant for women to use to take back their power from the patriarchy. Now, I listened to the argument of these two people, and again, I want to preface this by saying that everything that I'm about to say here is not me defending the patriarchy or defending men, nor denying what is currently happening in BC at least, and really around the world, because this happens every single day, but more so in BC and closer to home now, which is that here in BC we've had a lot of disappearances of women lately, and a lot of women have gone missing in places like dare to walk outside or even leave my house past 8 p.m. And if I haven't done so without sharing my location with at least one person, and that never happens because, Vancouver is arguably, it's quite dangerous at night, but suburban Victoria is another thing. Like, nothing ever happens there, to my extent of knowledge at least, and maybe that's being ignorant, but at least it never shows up in the media. So when it happens so close to you, and it did recently, a young woman was reported missing and literally like 2 blocks from my house, and was found dead a couple days later at a nearby park. And it wasn't ruled foul play, but obviously it still shakes you to the core, because it was 2 blocks from your house, which I've never experienced. So I sympathize with the intent of this phrase to give women a feeling of power and a feeling of control and a feeling of safety. And again, please reach out to me if anything that I say in the next couple minutes does not resonate with you, or you do not agree with, or maybe I have a misunderstanding of what this phrase really means and I'm looking too far into it. And I also may have a biased opinion because I grew up with a father who never made me feel belittled because of my sex or my gender, and I have a wonderful, loving boyfriend who has never made me feel less because of being a woman, and I've never felt like there was a power difference between the two of us. So again, like I said, my opinion might be biased because of this, but I want to approach this with the exact same narrative that I used towards Nancy Pelosi's speech, and I want to say that I disagree with this narrative. Because I believe that equality is when both parties are willing to work together to find a common ground and ensure that they are both receiving what they need and want in the ways that they should receive it, respectively. And I don't think that the phrase "kill all men" promotes equality between men and women. And I know that as women, we have suffered inequality for years. Like, we weren't even considered human beings up until, I think, less than 100 years ago. And I know that given a situation in which, and I speak for me personally, given in a situation where I was out walking to my car after a shift at night and I saw a man in the parking lot either hanging out or walking towards me, I would never assume, oh, he might be one of the men that isn't a rapist or isn't a killer or he doesn't have the intention of hurting me, right? Like, you're never going to sit there with the thought and just play with it. You're going to get in your car and you're going to drive away as fast as you can, right? And I understand that the saying is perpetuating that you should just assume the worst, right? And arguably, right now at least, it is a safer option for women until social justice and public safety measures can deem otherwise. However, where I disagree with this statement is that I don't think that it is a holistic and organic and honestly leadership-based approach to promoting equality between men and women, because as the party who is currently sitting at a social status less than men, I do not feel that going around perpetuating that saying would make me feel any better nor at an equal playing field to my male counterparts. I think that this saying is causing a notion of aggression, and it is trying to take back power in a way that is harmful, because these two individuals that I was talking to told me that I told them that, I understood that phrase for what it was, which was to kill all men, right? And then they told me that I was reading too far into it and that this was actually what it meant and stuff, but I do not feel that this phrase can be understood from that point of view without that explanation. I never would have understood that that was a deeper meaning behind it unless they had explained it to me, right? And I don't feel that if a 6-year-old little girl or even like a 12-year-old girl heard this saying, they would reason that that was a deeper meaning behind it. What I'm trying to say here is that we need to watch the ways in which we demand for respect and demand for our voices to be heard. I don't think that if a 6-year-old girl heard that saying, she would understand that it was just a phrase that is meant to be her red light to keep her safe. I think that if a 6-year-old girl heard her older siblings or her cousins or her friends saying this, she would then adopt the notion that she was allowed to hurt her male classmates. And that would in turn lead her to probably develop feelings of being higher than or better than or displaying feelings of hostility towards her male counterparts. And I don't think that that is change. I don't think that that is a change that we want to see, because if the world really came to that, which was a place in which there was just tension between men and women because women are scared and they are responding with fear by bestowing aggression onto the enemy. Now the enemy is feeling fear towards the women, and they are probably also going to respond with aggression in order to try to find that even playing field. And I just don't think that's a solution. To me, the phrase "kill all men" is an act of dehumanization. When we dehumanize an individual or a group of individuals, we do so because if any of you have ever read David Smith's Less Than Human book, David Smith describes that because we understand that psychologically killing or physically harming another human being would just be too psychologically difficult for us to bear afterwards, we resolve to non-physical ways of harming them, which in our mind is to dehumanize them and make them subhuman in our mind so that we can feel better about using harmful narratives towards them when we do. And to me, that is what this phrase perpetuates, that we can dehumanize our male societal counterparts in order to feel like we are taking a place in society that is not lower than them. And again, I emphasize that as women, we have struggled to be seen for eternity since this world was created, and the feelings being experienced right now by women, including myself, I swear I sit in this party of not being seen and not receiving equal treatment and not being paid the same as my male counterparts, and the frustration of and the desperation of feeling fear every time I walk out of my house in a skirt out of fear of being catcalled, and every time that I leave my house past 8 p.m., like, it is intoxicating and frankly deteriorating to live with this mindset of fear that I could be sexualized or I could be harassed because men see us as objects. But just like the moment before choosing not to respond aggressively to Nancy Pelosi's speech on social media, I have the option of responding with "kill all men," or choosing to educate my male counterparts from a place of vulnerability and showing them through my words from my heart in this case, that describe exactly what being in my position to feel like. And this is done through I statements. I feel that you just sexualized me. I feel that what you just said made me feel lower than you. I feel that I am not seen by you. I feel that there is a power misalignment here. And I think that having open and vulnerable conversations is what inspires change. And again, maybe that is just because I am a diehard Brené Brown fan and I love her work, and I think that it has created so much change in my life and the conversations that I've had with people and the effectiveness of the conversations that I've been able to have with people. But I have to ask myself, like, if it worked in those situations in which I was put in a position where I had to have a tough conversation with somebody and it actually resulted in me feeling seen, why isn't this the approach that we are taking to these situations? Why are we resorting to aggression to make our counterparts feel less and afraid of us versus working to have them see us for what we are and how we're feeling? And a lot of people will say, this has been tried in the past and it hasn't worked, and thus aggression is the only way that we can get through to men now to see us and to see the harm that they've caused and the harm that the patriarchy is to women. I get it. It's frustrating and it hurts to still not be at a place in which we can feel safe to leave our houses and which we can feel that we are being treated just as well as our male counterparts. I swear, I see you for those of you that feel this way, because I feel this way myself too. It would be so much easier to just shoot a man down with hatred and comments that perpetuated aggression to make them feel fearful and thus convince them using fear to never act that way again. But I don't think it's the answer. And I think that by instilling fear, we are only contributing to making things worse by creating a culture that is tense, and the people who have voices and who are seeing this behavior of lashback and cancel culture, frankly, are only going to become more fearful of joining the movement out of fear of they themselves being called out for being potentially wrong. Because then the counterparts that we are shooting down then do not feel seen by us. How can we expect to be seen if we are giving the person every reason not to see us using aggression and harming their pride and causing resentment towards us with criticism? Again, I'm not defending the patriarchy because I want to tear the patriarchy down just as much as any other of my women counterparts. However, I want to challenge us to act out of courage and love and tough conversation and leadership by being willing to have tough conversations that are going to hurt, and they are going to be revealing, and they are going to make the person see us by showing us our deepest pain through the use of words. I think that is where the solution lies. What if we change the narrative from kill all men to women should feel like they are safe and protected, and this needs to be a collective effort from both parties, women and men? How are we contributing to educating our male friends, our male siblings, our male family members, our male peers? How are we responding to their actions that stem from a place of patriarchy? How are we teaching our sons? I'm not currently a mother, but how are we teaching our sons and our younger family members and our younger siblings how they shouldn't treat women and how to not act according to the societal expectations that have been placed upon men, which in this case is to act like, tough guys and that you shouldn't be a simp because being a simp means that you are letting your partner, your female partner, to be above you. You can't be seen less. You cannot be seen as feminine. How are we untaming them from this narrative so that they can better contribute to change and the fight for equality and equity between men and women? I think that to be seen as women, we need to speak from a place of love and vulnerability and pain. One of my favorite Glennon Doyle quotes in her book Untamed that I'm still currently reading is, "I can use pain to become." And I think that if we can use pain to drive our own self-improvement and our own self-change, we can use pain in a proactive way and in a way that is not inflicting that pain onto others to get them to see us. And this doesn't just go for women, this goes to everybody who is currently in a place where they do not feel seen and where they feel that they are not receiving equal treatment or equal effort from whether it's a friend, a family member, a partner, whatever the case may be. I believe that our pain is the answer to how we can solve the problem that we're currently facing. But it's when we let the hurt and the frustration and the anger and the sadness that is sitting over top of the pain and covering it, if we use those emotions to guide our response before we choose to paint and illustrate our pain in a vulnerable and honest way to the person that is causing us to feel this way, that is when we will lose the person's attention and their involvement in the solution. Because again, criticism instills resentment and fear and embarrassment and shame in the other person, blinding them from the problem and blinding us from their sight. We prevent ourselves from being seen by the other person. It is when we take that pain and show the person that pain through vulnerability and through stories and through expressing the feelings that we have felt through from their actions and from their words. Only then can we expect to have an ally that is helping us further inspire change and further help others see us. Because when we use aggression and fear to belittle a person, and by trying to make them see our pain by inflicting it on them and hoping that they feel it as well, that we lose them and we create a culture that perpetuates that instilling fear is the answer, when in reality it's only driving us further apart from each other, and it is only causing us to harm each other, and it is only causing us to lose the battle in the fight to change. Thank you so much for joining me on today's podcast. Thank you for letting me get vulnerable. Thank you for letting me express myself. And again, I want to say that if you have anything to say towards anything that I said in the podcast in this episode, if there's anything that resonated with you or didn't resonate with you, and you want to share your opinion with me, I am so open to hearing it, and I would love to hear it. So please send me a direct message, an email, or a voice memo directly to the podcast. I would love to talk to you and to hear your thoughts. Other than that, have a great rest of your week, everybody, and I will see you in the next episode.